And welcome everyone to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. Joining me, a co-host, a marketing speaker and consultant who spent his whole career helping his customers keep their marketing simple but effective. He's the author of 𝗏𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer, and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience. He enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. Now, normally at this point, I would say all the way from La France, please welcome. But today, Monsieur Pascal Fintoni is back in Blighty.
Yeah, I am indeed. So this remains international recording because I am in England, you are in Scotland.
That is true.
Where about a fortnight ago I was 1,000 miles away from you. I am now a mere 110 miles away from you, Roger.
So from La France to Blythe.
I know. But it's going to be done, when you're an international man of mystery. And, well, if you're watching the video version of this recording, you might notice 2 very famous characters over my shoulder.
Yeah, Laurel and Hardy. I'd noticed that. What are they doing in the background there?
When we moved into this apartment, I was thinking there's got to be a reason why those 2 very famous performers are here. And sure enough, Stan Laurel is linked to the town and city of Blythe. In fact, it's his father who was a theatre promoter and architect. I mean, he even built the theatre as well as creating the shows. And Stan Laurel started a very young lad, as they say around here, helping his dad at a local theatre. No longer with us. It was destroyed, sadly, in 1983, according to Wikipedia. But if you go to a park called Ridley Park in Blythe, there is a statue of Stan Laurel.
Wow. Oh, of course, Laurel and Hardy, still amongst the best comedians and short comedy film stars of all time, in my opinion.
Ahead of their times back then, even with the silent movies all the way to the talkies.
Yeah.
But this is what Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast is all about. We combine business advice with popular culture and links to essentially what makes us, excited in terms of the world of communication. It could be B2B, B2C, all the way to entertainment. There are lessons to be derived from all sectors. I want to say a big thank you for our lovely audience. We've had some amazing sharing on Twitter. We still say Twitter on this show. We will move on to X when Monsieur Musk decides to change the brand. Because after all, if you go online, it still says twitter.com/whatever, the address is. But he's promised that soon he will get things right.
Well, I still think of it as Twitter. And it's interesting, how most websites have these sharing buttons, and you can download all these sharing buttons for videos and stuff like that. They're all still giving you the Twitter bird, the blue Twitter bird. So everybody's going to have to catch up at some point. And then Musk will probably change his mind and go back to the bird or something like that.
Absolutely. Now, if you're new to this audio and video magazine, this is essentially a source of inspiration. This is about Roger and I sharing lessons from our travels as speakers and consultants, but also picking what's happening in the media and beyond. In the news section, we have also the content spotlights. We have This Week in History. We've got marketing, tech, and apps. And we always close the recording with one of our favorite segments, film marketing. It was your turn, Roger, to select the film.
Yes. Now, I'm thinking perhaps, Pascal, that this might be the earliest film that we've had a look at in our 108 episodes. Mainly we tend to go back about 20 to 30 years, don't we? But this film was released in 1957, and it's called Paths of Glory.
What a fine selection again. We'll talk about a lot with marketing. We'll talk about, of course, what it was like to market a film with such controversy in the world that was then 1957, a very, very different era, as you can imagine. But my memory immediately was to watch this at school. We were shown on this very, very old TV. The entire school gathered into the hall, and we watched it then. But more about it when we discuss film marketing. For now, let's begin with In the News.
63% of British adults are open to adverts in exchange for free streaming content, with 60% subscribing up to 3 streaming services, according to a study by the Trade Desk.
More stats for you. 59% of marketing leaders agree that the IT policies are constraining the use of emerging technologies, and 78% of respondents say they must select from pre-approved vendors.
Google is rolling out the option for businesses to add social media links directly within their Google business profile. The list currently includes Twitter/X, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and TikTok.
Okay, well, Cadbury Dairy Milk has launched its very first audio ads series, celebrating real-life moments of generosity. As part of its ongoing campaign, there's a glass and a half in every one.
55% of business leaders in the UK listen to podcasts every day, which represents a significant boost for top-of-funnel activities, according to new research by firms Lower Street and Content FX.
While Spotify is joining other content platforms like working with OpenAI to clone the voice of podcast host and guest in different languages and matching the original speaker style.
Vodafone's youth-focused mobile network 𝗧𝗵𝗶 has installed a 3D hologram in London's King's Cross station, featuring two brains chatting to each other from inside jars. Okay.
And Movember is celebrating 20 years of with the 𝗧𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀 TV spot that features people making a pilgrimage across a desert to find a gigantic silvery moustache.
There's a bit some surreal stuff going on here, Pascal. Moustaches and brains in tins and brains in jars. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm due to go down to London in a month's time for an event at the Excel Centre. I'm hoping they'll still be there, but that's going to be really quite peculiar to see. I've seen the TV adverts, as I'm sure you have, of the two brains in jars talking to each other. Clearly, we and I are not the intended target. You know, this is a youth-focused mobile network, 𝗧𝗵𝗀. But yeah, why not? But the Movember one, the 𝗧 is calling. The advert is just so funny. But you're back to the physicality of finding a gigantic silvery moustache.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. There was a Doctor Who episode way back in the 70s, about 1976, I think, called "The Brain of Morbius," and there was basically all that was left of this criminal was a brain, and it was in a jar, and it was talking to the people, and it used to glow as it talked, and that was immediately what came to my mind when I read that out. It was, it's the brain of Morbius talking to each other.
Yeah, and that's interesting because therefore you're making the reference. I don't know whether young generation are as caught up as you are with Doctor Who, or whether that would be missed for them. But I want to go back to the top and ask you about the free streaming content supporting by advertising. Then I'll move on to ask your views on this whole business of audio, Cadbury's, Spotify, and so on. And then we'll close with Google. So that's interesting, isn't it? So what's happening at the moment? There are so many streaming services coming online. You know, Paramount Plus is coming along. We talk about Max. There's going to be more. AMC Plus is coming in the UK. So there's so much to choose that eventually is just too expensive, right? I mean, most people have 3, 4. And then, well, let's be honest, you start to cheat. You know, you share with friends and family because you can't spend literally £100 a month on streaming services. So now the offer will be, well, why don't you get yourself a version of Netflix, for example, as we reported, where it would be free to you or at a much lower cost, but with adverts.
Yeah, I mean, you get used to the luxury of not having adverts, don't you? And that's one of the things I do like about Netflix. And funnily enough, we watched something on Sky the other day, and the adverts come in. You think, oh no, and okay, you can skim through the adverts if you have buffered it or you've recorded it earlier, but you still have that moment where you think, oh, just go away. Having said that, yesterday I got an email from Netflix telling me, Mr. Edwards, we're putting the price up again. So the cost of Netflix has gone up twice over the last 12 months by another £2. So I think the 4K version of Netflix is now £17.99. Wow. And that's in this climate of credit squeeze and cost of living crisis, it all starts to add up. And if everybody starts adding up the costs, then yes, I can see that you're just going to have to grin and bear it and let the adverts play and, grit your teeth while they're on and take the cut in the monthly amount. What
was interesting about this research from the trade desk, those were being interviewed, so to speak, or surveyed, said, but there is one condition. For this to work for us, there needs to be as little disruption as possible with the advert. That is to say, the advert needs to feel in context of the film I'm watching. We see a lot of example of that, particularly in UK TV. Channel 4 does a better job than most, where if you watch, for example, an action movie, the advert tends to be quite tongue-in-cheek action too. If it's horror, they tend to, particularly with Halloween approaching and so on. So what they were saying is, yeah, we'll consider it, but don't make it so disruptive where I'm watching a movie of a particular genre and a particular kind of emotional, if you like, environment, and then the advert is contrary to that. I mean, we did a test maybe 2 years ago where Amazon had let's say, a sister company of sort, which was all about horror movies. Name escapes me. So we thought, well, you could try it out and have the adverts, and those adverts were actually very poor quality. They were very grainy compared to the HD and 4K quality of the movies, but they were also, I mean, so much out of context. We didn't manage to watch the full film. It was too disruptive for us.
Yeah, and sometimes I just wonder what the effectiveness of these adverts is. I mean, you always glaze over when the adverts come on. You get distracted, you check your phone, you have a conversation with somebody else who might be in the room. And are you even noticing who's advertising and what the brand is, or even what the product is? I would love to know whether it really is that effective.
Well, certainly many years ago, I'm talking about maybe 2 decades ago, remember 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗏 did a survey about what they call recall. So TV adverts, and people were interviewed, do you remember seeing this advert on TV? And for an agency that literally made a fortune out of advertising, I thought it was a very brave thing to do, but why not? Let's be honest. And the results were that people sometimes misremembered an advert. So they thought this is something that was not published at all. And the very advert that had been published and shared, they could not remember them. So I think you're right. A bit like social media, we've learned to just ignore and pass.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I would spend some time on audio marketing. So you've got Cadbury Dairy Milk doing their first audio series. So these are 60-second mini stories. So these are true stories of kindness that have been then acted out by voiceover artists and actors. Then you've got obviously stats coming through saying actually for decision makers, audio seems to be the awareness raising stage. And then this business of Spotify, literally allowing you to convert, let's say, this episode into Spanish, into German, into French, but it sounds just like Roger Edwin, and it sounds just like Pascal Fintoni.
Yeah, I mean, audio's great, isn't it? And maybe this is the sort of post-pandemic, everybody's on the move again. When we were all confined to houses or confined to one location, video became much stronger, didn't it? And everybody was consuming video. But now people are back behind the wheels of cars. People are on trains again. Maybe people are starting to listen to audio more. I mean, I do find it interesting. Say 55% of business leaders in the UK listen to podcasts every day. Well, they're not going to be listening to podcasts at work, are they? Where they're going to be listening to podcasts is when they're traveling to work, when they're on the train, tube, in the car. So I think it's just it's a consequence of us getting back to normal. The Spotify thing is a bit weird. I mean, I don't speak Spanish. I don't speak French. I speak a little bit of French, very little bit of A-level French. And when I speak it, it sounds dreadful. So it would just look weird if it was me sounding French. I just think, well, why? It's not me. Why bother? People don't know me as a French speaker. They don't know me as a Spanish speaker. So why have the AI thing translated into me speaking French or Spanish? Why not just have a proper Spanish person or a proper French person doing it? I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting a bit grumpy with all this AI stuff that's going on at the moment.
No, and the argument from Spotify is about a wider reach. And of course, they're testing it with their celebrity podcast. You would expect them. So there's already a known personal brand. And people who, maybe would happily listen and read the English version perhaps for ease, would listen to the German translation and interpretation and so on. I think, for me, we're going to see more and more examples of that. Did you ever see the one from our friend Ian Anderson Gray, where he tried this AI platform called 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗀, and he spoke in Italian? That was hysterical to watch, because the video format was even matching the lip movement to the Italian words, even though a moment ago it spoke in English.
No, I mean, it sort of gives me Max Headroom vibes, and it takes it away from being real. And I think we've got to be very, very careful, and that we don't move too far away from being human. And if it becomes too artificial, people will just feel a little bit weird about it.
Yeah, I like, before we move on to the Google business profile, the Cadbury Dairy Milk, because it's a reminder, which is a running thread through all the episodes of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast, the power of story, because they are telling real life stories, but also, to be able to deliver it in 60 seconds. There's something in there that I find quite inspiring about our own endeavors, all of us in the world of marketing. Very quickly, Google Business Profile. So they've introduced only very recently the additional options to add social media links. So I had a play yesterday. It's all right. If you go back to your profile and you click on the icon where that is like a pen, you can edit. And sure enough, there's a little button saying new, and you can add your Twitter profile and so on. One thing that was disappointing, I was hoping to add more than one YouTube channel. I wanted to add the Two Geeks and Marketing podcast. I want to add mine and other things I've been working on, but you can only have one Twitter profile and one Facebook profile and so on, which is probably going against what's happening at the moment, because actually recently Facebook is looking into multiple profiles owned by one individual. So, but it works. And I think anything that can help, your customers get in touch with you by using their favorite search engine is a plus for me.
Absolutely right. In fact, I would have assumed that Google already did this. I was quite surprised when I read that out to think, oh, did they not do that already? It seems a bit late, and they're a bit late to the game with this one, which is unusual for Google.
Very. So everyone, let us know if there are some news that which have included. Do send in the comments as well, things that you've reacted to very recently. Roger, always a pleasure to hear your views on the latest announcements and changes in the world of marketing. But we're going to slow things down now with our segment, the Content Spotlights. Now, as a reminder for this segment of the show, without discussing it in advance, Roger and I present each other an item of content. It could be an article, a video, a podcast, even an infographic, something that we can go for a deep dive on to find its meaning, potential lessons for all of us marketers out there. So, Roger, what is your selection for today's episode?
I'm going to talk about an article which I found on a website called Niche Pursuits, and the article is written by 𝗂𝗵𝗲 𝗠𝗏. And I apologize if I've pronounced that wrong. The article is called "How to Write Faster: 12 Steps to Produce 3,000 plus words a day." Now, a lot of people listening to this might be thinking, why on earth is Roger going to talk about an article which teaches you how to write better, especially write 3,000 words a day, when all we need to do now is go to ChatGTP and ask ChatGTP to do it for us? And I guess I was prompted to look at this article and prompted to choose this article for Content Spotlights by a post I saw on LinkedIn a few days ago. And it was one of these people who've adopted AI as their latest shiny toy. They were metaverse experts last year. Now they are AI experts. And this person was saying, here's the best way to write an article. So give ChatGTP all these prompts, and then once you've got the article from ChatGTP, you then go through it line by line and change it so that it sounds like you, and it would look as if you had written it. And somebody put in the comments below, then why don't you just write the bloody thing yourself? And it just made me laugh out loud when I saw that. And it just makes you wonder sometimes, because we do know, okay, ChatGTP is pretty good at coming up with drafts and stuff like that. But we also know that it hallucinates. We also know that it doesn't have access to everything out there. And sometimes it gets its information wrong, it doesn't quote sources and this, that, and the other. And if you're writing an article, you're going to have to go through and source all of those things anyway. So I thought, why don't we just get back to basics and actually start writing ourselves? And I actually do like writing. I have a regular column in a magazine called Money Marketing. It's a financial services magazine. I write an article for them regularly, and I have other articles that I write for clients, which sometimes don't go out in my name. I have to say it's a bit unfortunate, but I learn how to write in their style. So this article really just gives you a load of tips, some of which are the bleeding obvious, some of which I quite like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my own final tip on at the end, which I think has helped me be a better writer. So how to write faster, option number one, tip number one is start with the outline. Now that seems like the bleeding obvious, doesn't it? But how many times have you opened Word or got a piece of paper and stared at that blank piece of paper and waited for that moment of inspiration and it doesn't come? So what 𝗓𝗵𝗶 is saying here is just write the headings, write some bullet points, get the creative juices started, and then you hit the start button and you start typing or you start writing. Here comes tip number 2. Now, I am guilty of this one many, many times. Avoid editing whilst you're writing. Now, I'm sure you've done the same, Pascal. You're writing, you get a paragraph, you finish the paragraph, you review the paragraph, and I don't like that sentence. So you go back and you start rewriting it. Don't do that. Get the whole thing out on paper, get it all on the screen, type it out, write it out, and then go back and edit. Because if you start editing as you're writing, your brain starts doing a different sort of work. You're not being creative, you're in editing mode, and it affects your creative ability. So that is a massively important tip, and one that it took me a long time to get away from. Tip number 3, if you're typing, learn how to type faster. Now, I don't know when I got to the stage that I could type without looking at the keyboard. I sort of realized one day, crikey, I can type without looking at the keyboard, and I know where the keys are, and I'm getting the keys right. If you need to spend a bit of time learning how to do that, it will speed up your ability to write so much more. Absolutely incredible. Number 4, another bleeding obvious one, but again, eliminate all distractions. Now, again, during the pandemic, we were locked away. We had family, friends, and all around us, work colleagues, whatever it is. Get yourself into a quiet room, turn your mobile phone off, get away from social media, get away from anything that can interrupt you, and spend that time dedicated to that creative writing. And it may well be that you want to use one of those techniques, and this is tip number 5, like the Pomodoro technique, where you write for 25 minutes and then you give yourself a 5-minute break, and then you write for 25 minutes and then you give yourself a 5-minute break. But there are all sorts of other ways of doing that. But write in short bursts and then have a break is a really good way to keep the creative juices flowing in your head. Now, obviously, the next tip involves using AI tools to defeat writer's block. I guess one of the ways that I have seen ChatGPT work quite nicely is coming up with prompts and ideas for you. So you could say, I need to write an article about pensions, or I need to write an article about mortgages. Give me a few ideas, and it gives you a few ideas, and then you take it away and you write it yourself. So I can understand that, but resist the temptation to get it to do the first draft is probably what I would say. And his final tip, which is one that I absolutely love, and it is try using speech to text tools. Now, we all have these on our phones these days. There's usually a little microphone icon down in the corner. You press it, you talk into it, and your speech appears immediately on the screen with amazing accuracy. Now, I started doing this many, many years ago, Pascal. I even had a PC program which was called Dragon Speaking or something like that, and it was actually quite buggy at the time. But all of these things now are remarkably accurate. They'll allow you to say full stop and comma and colon and semicolon, and it picks it all up, and speech marks and all of that. So you can get your first draft down by using these speech to text tools. And I love it because one of the best ways to write, in my opinion, is to write like you talk. And what's the best way to write like you talk? To talk and get it to write it down for you. Now, I'm going to finish Ahmed's article off by giving you an extra tip, which is one thing that I do when I write my money marketing articles. And this sort of combines all of those things together to a certain extent, especially making sure you've practiced how to type without looking at the keyboard. And this is what I do. I set the Word document up. I put the cursor right at the top, and then I turn my computer screen off, and then I type, and I keep typing until I finish the draft, and then I turn the screen back on. Great thing about that is you can't go back and edit. Even if you force yourself not to, I still have that desire to do it. By turning the screen off, it kills any chance I've got of doing that. It makes you focus entirely on the task because you're not getting distracted by any other tabs you might have open on your screen. And actually, once you turn the screen back on, you'll be absolutely surprised by how good and how accurate it was in the first place. And then you just obviously have to go through and edit it a little bit. But you'll find that what you produce at the end of that is probably going to be far superior than a first draft by ChatGPT. I guarantee it.
You know what is interesting is about this need to remind people about perhaps skills that have been put to one side because you can't do everything at the same time. I always say to my customers, if you want to learn a piece of software, you can't at the same time keep practicing your writing. At the moment, I'm having a lot of conversation about the return to email marketing and long form blogging. And people are saying, oh, it's hard. I say, yeah, it's hard because you're out of practice. It's like going to the gym or whatever. Because you've been so focused on your micro content on social media that you're out of the practice. But ultimately, I say, I love picking number one, the outline. If you just put the headers and the subheaders at the beginning, or give yourself a brief, write the introduction. What is this all about? What do I want to achieve? What would be the desired effect of people reading till the end this article? And I think this is advice for team leaders. This is advice for business owners. When you look at the development of your personnel, yes, they need to understand the tools of the time, but not at the expense of their own kind of skills. I think to me that's the warning of that article.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But let's embrace writing again. Everybody can do it. We all did it at school, and it's a great way to be creative and always use the tools that are available to help you rather than to replace you.
Absolutely. Now, my selection, I want to give you a bit of a background story to this. So I came across a YouTube short, one of those very short videos, about maybe a week ago, and it had the very catchy title of "Marketing is 85% of Success." And very, very quickly, as you know, they play automatically. I saw the now famous Dr. Jordan B. Peterson being interviewed, but it was 45 seconds, just him saying marketing is brilliant. I said, well, of course it is. But I wanted to know, what did he say before and what did he say after? Because I found those YouTube shorts sometimes they're a bit too manipulative. And if I may say so, for all of you out there who are in the business of using someone else's content to publish YouTube shorts to, further your own kind of gains, can you have the decency to at least tell us where you got that video from? Because what took place then, you'd be very proud of me, Roger, is detective work. I wanted to find the original video. So I had to look at what Dr. Jordan Peterson was wearing, his posture was in background. It was really good. But I was lucky because I put the keywords Jordan Peterson marketing, and then I looked in his official channel, and sure enough, found the entire interview. And this is actually interesting because Dr. Jordan Peterson was being interviewed at the time of, this was March 2021. The world was a different place altogether. As you may remember, it was being interviewed by a lady called Nicole Arbour, which is a Canadian comedian, a singer, and now a YouTuber, and she's a performer on TV as well as stage. And they were having this really upbeat, fun conversation about a multitude of things, which I think was interesting. They talk about role models, they talk about sense of marketing, social media, Harry Potter, they talk about dating, and all kind of things. And I think it was one of those where I think they're both having a great time. If you're not familiar with Dr. Jordan Peterson, that would be a surprise, but why not? You need to know that he's a Canadian psychologist, author, now speaker, and media commentator, perhaps best known for one of his books, The 12 Rules of Life, An Antidote to Chaos, particularly addressing the need of young people to find their way in this strange world. So the bit of the YouTube short, I was able to listen to a few minutes before and a few minutes after. And that was so important because actually the snippets didn't do it justice. What Jordan Peterson was talking about was casual contempt. He was telling the story that unfortunately, that's part of the tapestry of life and business life. You will have people who have casual contempt for other departments and other functions. And, no surprise there to suggest to you that, of course, you're going to have been the subject of casual content many a time by people who don't understand sales and marketing. And what he was saying is, now, it happens all the time. You've got academia, which you've got casual contempt for corporates, and within corporates, you've got the engineers who've got casual contempt for those who work in marketing, and then those who work in marketing have casual contempt for those who work in health and safety. I don't know. You say, and whilst people sometimes smile at the casual contempt, sometimes that he told jibe, during the lunch break, or the kind of nods and wink during the boardroom meeting. His argument is it's very, very unhelpful for society and for a business to move forward. And then he tells his own story. He tells a story that a long time ago, he created a software solution that would help individuals actually write better, Roger. We've done this again. And his words, Jordan Peterson saying, I believed that if you made a good product, it will sell itself. That was his belief back at the time. He was absolutely convinced that 95% of the key to success was actually a product of quality. And he kind of confesses that he spent then the next 10 years creating more and more products, thinking, well, the reason it's not selling is because they're not good enough. So he keeps forcing himself to create more product, and failed miserably time and time again to sell them, particularly to corporates who maybe had casual content for him being from academia. And this painful kind of transformation, realization, which is often the case, led to him understanding that really the product bit is maybe 15% of your future success, that marketing and sales, communications, to him now is 85%. And he said, I was guilty of the casual contempt towards sales and marketing. And this conclusion is that marketing is now, to begin with, unbelievably difficult, but absolutely necessary. But he didn't make the mistake twice. When obviously in the early 2000s, tech came along and he talks a lot about YouTube and now TikTok. He said, I did not make the same mistake twice. And I said, I did not have that casual content for technologies. And he embraced it thoroughly. And for someone who is probably of our generation or a fraction older, Roger, he's really, really savvy with all the tech that I mentioned time and time on the program. And what he's saying is, don't make my mistakes. And he say, I'm very aware that right now, the vast majority of the tech you can see, from YouTube to TikTok to Google to AI and whatever, their true potential is masked by the apparent triviality and the misuse by all those idiots out there. But please understand, the technology advances are so important to us to not fall into the trap of casual content. Experiment, find out what's working for you and not working for you, and you'll move much, much faster as an individual, as a business, and a society. And of course, as well as casual contempt towards tech, resist temptation, if you can, to have casual contempt towards teams from a different discipline.
There's a lot going on here, and I mean, to a certain extent, I disagree with the heading. Marketing is 85% of success. What he's really saying, I think, is promotion is 85% of success. Because if you're an old git like me, and you still adhere to the traditional marketing principles, then product is part of marketing. I don't like it when people say product is over here and marketing's over there. What they really mean is here's product and here's promotion, which are two of the 4 Ps of marketing. Marketing as a whole includes product and it includes promotion. And when people say marketing in this context, what I think they really mean is advertising and promotion, rather than what I would generally say is the marketing mix. But I agree with the sentiment of what he's saying. You can't build something and then people will come. You've got to tell them it's there. You've got to make them understand how you're fixing their problem, and that involves communication.
For me, what was important, my own journey of not being satisfied with just the 45-second headline and thinking there's got to be something else to this, before and after. And I'm so pleased I listened to the entire 4-minute bit about sales and marketing. I mean, this conversation is like ours, about an hour and a quarter all in, and it's really good fun to listen to very bright individuals having a great time and doing what we did back then during COVID, trying to essentially have an enjoyable, morning. But for me, it's back to that. I see in my line of work, that casual contempt of, I'm not going to bother with this because of the perception. And I think he's right. The vast majority of the tech solutions don't do a good enough job to separate themselves from what he called the triviality because of its misuse. So we're saying when he started with YouTube back in 2006, he was mocked by his colleagues at university because, of course, YouTube was mostly about cats and skateboarding accidents, but look where he is now and look where his channel is. So yeah, casual contempt for me is an interesting concept, and if you're a team leader, if you're a business owner, see what you can do to reduce it as much as possible. Now listen, we said it before, none of this would be possible without the hard work and dedication of the pioneers of the recent and distant past. So it is time to move on to our next segment, This Week in History.
In 1960, the Accutron 214 becomes the world's first electronic wristwatch to be sold to the public. The original circuit used a germanium PNP transistor circuit with timing accuracy of better than 2 seconds per day.
Wow, in 1984, the first Terminator movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger is released. It was then low in budget, but big on story and spectacle.
In 2001, Microsoft releases the operating system Windows XP, the successor to both Windows 2000 and Windows ME. Designed to unify the Windows NT and Windows 95 operating systems, Windows XP was not replaced by Microsoft until January 2007. Now, that sentence has got to win an award for the most use of acronyms and brand names that I've seen for a long time.
We shall talk about this in a moment, but the same year, 2001, Steve Jobs introduces the original iPod, featuring a 5 gigabyte hard drive, FireWire connectivity, and synchronization to iTunes with the slogan, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah, I was quite late to the iPod actually. I didn't have one of the originals, and the originals were actually quite big, weren't they? They were like little bricks that you used to have to carry on your belt. I waited until the iPod Minis came out, and I thought that they were a lot snazzier.
Yeah, I want to take you back to the one you read about, the electronic wristwatch. I think I got one in one of my birthdays when I was maybe 8 or 9, and it was just magical. So my parents had the old watches, right, with the needles and the ticking noises. Mine was showing, the on screen the hour. I could press a button and get a blue light, so I could spend the whole night checking the time and so on. It was just so exciting to have something electronic. But I had no idea that it started as far back as 1960. But both in terms of this one that you read, and you had you read one about Windows, this idea of simplicity. So Steve Jobs, at heart, was a marketer and communicator, and he knew they could have spent an hour talking about the 5 gig drive hard drive. He could have spent hours talking about the germanium PNP transistor circuit. This is meaningless to an audience, and he just said it: 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Absolutely. Get to the message. No, most people don't want to hear about all the complexity and all the jargon. Just get to the point. Was that original wristwatch, was it a digital? Was it numbers, or was it still an
I know
analog face?
It was numbers. I mean, it was
numbers.
just, and I kept staring at them, wanting them to change. I think you could put an alarm, which annoyed my parents because it was magical. So I opened the alarm every 10 minutes just to hear the watch, beep.
Yeah, I think it was Douglas Adams that said in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that one of the reasons why human beings will never amount to anything is that they still think that digital watches are a pretty neat idea. Terminator. What a film. What a film. And when I think about Terminator, I must have watched that film loads of times because it was around about the time I was still at school, teenager, going out with my buddies, watching films with my buddies, probably drinking cans of beer with my buddies. And I think we watched the original Terminator loads and loads of times. We wore out Blockbuster's copy of Terminator, but it was actually really quite low budget, wasn't it?
It was, and in fact, if you want to hear the full version of this review, we reviewed Terminator, the marketing of, in episode 15 of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast. But you're right, this was indie filmmaking. This was guerrilla filmmaking. James Cameron and co. sometimes didn't ask permission; they asked for forgiveness, which is always the case, and proportionate to the budget and the earnings afterwards, all of them, including the producers like Gail and her, were kind of propelled into movie stardom. But what makes it work, and sometimes they'd be better than the others, it's just story. It's just gripping.
Yeah, no, it was the story. The story was absolutely everything about it. I think you forgive the slightly dodgy special effects because the story is so strong. And again, we've come back to this on this show so many times. Story is so important in your marketing.
I think the forgiveness you mentioned a moment ago is equal to the one for Jaws. By the time the shark appears, you're so sucked into the story and the character arcs and so on that you believe it because you see the animation at the end. Yeah, all right, compared to today's. But 1984, this is where we start to have personal computers, video games at home, all the things we're talking about, and I think that the timing. But of course, it was filmed in such a clever way. It was noir, they were using low light and so on, and a formidable foe. And to think that, you remember, they were thinking to make Arnold Schwarzenegger actually the hero and not, the threat. Incredible.
Yeah. And of course, everybody rates Terminator 2 as one of the best movies of all time. But as This Week in History proves, if there hadn't been that low-budget original, we would never have got the souped-up version. So
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I have to confess, these trips down memory lane are always so enjoyable because it takes us back to a time where we were present, in the 80s and 70s and so on. And I think for me, it's back to why this segment is important. If you have a sense of history, then you have a good sense of direction. And to a point, looking at tech, for example, you and I on occasion will be the one to go, yeah, sure, but we may like excitement because we know where it's coming from, and it makes sense for things like ChatGPT to exist. It makes sense for Canva to be doing what it's doing because we can recognize that there was the early attempts in the 70s and the 80s and so on. And can I just say that I absolutely loved Windows XP. And it may well be because it moved on from Windows XP that I became a Mac user years later. But let's move on to our next segment, marketing tech and apps. Now, in this segment of the show, we surprise each other again with a new discovery, hardware or software, something that can make life easier as a content creator and marketer. So, Roger, what wonders have you unearthed for us?
Well, I'm going to be talking about video again, Pascal. Now, a while back on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, I didn't have the foresight to go back and check which episode, but it's probably over a year ago. I had a bit of a moan about the Filmic Pro app on the iPhone and the Android. Now, the Filmic Pro app was a great video app that you could download. It had a nominal cost. I think it was about $5.99 or something like that. But it was a remarkably good app, and it was so much better than the native app that comes with the iPhone. And you could do all the usual things you could do with a full camera. You could adjust the aperture, you could adjust the focus, and all of those other things as well. And I raved about Filmic Pro until they decided to introduce this subscription model, and it went to some ridiculous amount of money, like $9.99 a month. And everybody who bought the original version was basically just, it stopped, no more support for this. And if you want the snazzy features, you've got to pay $9.99 a month. And I just thought, sorry, you've lost me, I'm out. I came across this new app, which is called the Blackmagic Camera app. Now, at the moment, it is only available on iPhone, but apparently there is going to be a version for Android coming along. And it does pretty much everything that Filmic Pro did, but it's totally free. There's no charge involved. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, well, what they'll do is they'll do the same as Filmic Pro did, and they will add a price once they've sucked everybody in, just like Filmic Pro did. But I'm not sure they will, because when you dig a bit deeper into this, you find out that the company that creates the Blackmagic Camera app is Blackmagic Design, who are also behind the very, very popular editing software DaVinci Resolve, which is probably the second most popular video editing software package after Adobe Premiere Pro. And I think what these guys are doing is giving this app away for free, getting people interested in getting a bit more technical with their video production, so they can adjust the aperture and they can adjust the focus a little bit more detailed than they can in the native app. And eventually those people then go on to buy DaVinci Resolve and DaVinci Resolve Pro, or any of the other Blackmagic Design products. So whilst I was raving about Blackmagic Camera app, because all of a sudden now we've got a free version of something as good quality as Filmic Pro, it's actually really, I think, just a clever bit of, it's almost like the Trojan horse, isn't it? They're giving you this free app because they think that you'll get to understand their product and their brand and then go on to buy DaVinci Resolve later. So I do love that. My second one, and I've been waiting for this, Pascal, for a long time. Now, as you know, for my vlogs, for about the last 2 years, I have been using something called a DJI Pocket 2, or the DJI Osmo Pocket 2, which is a remarkable but very small handheld camera with a little gimbal on the top. And you've complimented me before on the quality of the images that this camera produces and that I've got in my vlogs, and the stabilization is absolutely amazing. Now, I bought the Pocket 2 a year after it was released, and I've been using it for 2 years, and DJI have this week just announced that the new version of this camera, the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, will be released on the 25th of October, which is actually today that this podcast is going live. So the Osmo Pocket 3 will be out. Now, the specs look incredible. The one downside of the Osmo Pocket 2 is it like a lot of small cameras, it doesn't do very well when the light starts to get a bit dim. The Osmo Pocket 3 apparently has a 1-inch sensor, which is the same size of sensor that you would find in a micro 2/3 camera, like a Lumix G95 or a Lumix G85. So the quality of video that should be achievable by this new one will be phenomenal. It will also record apparently 4K up to 120 frames per second, which is pretty remarkable for a camera that small. The only thing is the price point. We don't know how much it's going to be. I think it's probably going to be a lot more expensive than the old one. And I have to say, I am so happy still with the image quality that I get from the Pocket 2, and most of the video that I do is usually during the day and I'm outside, so I'm not that bothered about it performing better in darker situations. Maybe I'll wait a little bit of time and get the reviews in before I do shell out some money to upgrade for what effectively would be 4K at 120 frames per second rather than 4K at 60, which is what it will currently do.
Yeah, I must confess, I was almost thinking you're going to put it out as a Christmas request to whoever's listened to this show. But I think it's some wise. It does mean, however, for our viewers and listeners, and I must encourage you to go and check out Roger's vlog on Roger's channel. The quality is outstanding. I mean, I put it to the test, as you know. So we have a routine where every Sunday morning with the bacon sarnie, we catch up on the latest episode of Roger's vlog. And so this is the acid test, full on flat screen TV. And the image and sound is exquisite. But for viewers and listeners where you're thinking of starting maybe your own video diaries using Rogers as an example, there could be a lot of Pocket 2 therefore out there, being sold online at a very, very good rate.
Right. Absolutely right. And I would be honest, the Pocket 2 is absolutely superb still. And, if I do buy a Pocket 3, I will probably try and sell the Pocket 2 to somebody in that situation. And I think that they would be getting a fabulous camera.
Yeah.
So Pascal, what have you got for us this week?
Yes, thank you very much. From hardware to software, online solutions. So I got an email actually from Headliner. They've been mentioned a few times on the show. They allow you to repurpose audio videos, audio sound into audiograms, video snippets, and more. And some time ago, we reported that they were launching an AI-powered solution called 𝗏𝗏, which I think is for like editing, so 𝗏𝗏𝗸𝗏. And I must confess, I had a look, didn't quite see, but they persevered, and rightly so. And I got an email which was a bit clearer, and I put it to the test. So 𝗏𝗏 is essentially a free, speech to text transcription service powered by AI. So you will have to go back in and edit. That's only natural. So I put it to the test, and I uploaded one of our episodes. It takes a while because our audio video magazine is over an hour long, and what I got back was really, really impressive in terms of quality, even with my kind of very muddled accent now. And the question that I'm going to put to you in the green room one day is, could we potentially to increase the reach of our show, look at transcribing some, if not all, of the segment. But certainly, 𝗏𝗏 does a very, very good job. It splits the different speakers as well, and then you can do a find and replace from Microsoft Word and put the name as opposed to speaker 1 or speaker 2. It removes the ums and the ahs and makes some suggestions. So really happy that they pursue with their communication, really clearer, and I went back and I had a go. So then I'm thinking, this is about getting more value from your content, so from audio to text. I've seen also some very good examples in terms of long-form blogging to make the experience on the website more interesting. And what I've seen people do is they summarize the long-form article. So we're talking, a long-form article really that wouldn't work if it was short. They summarize the long-form article content into a slideshow. If you have a visitor who's a bit in a hurry, or to whet the appetite for someone to say, this is really worth your while, and quickly go through those slides, you'll see for yourself some of them, maybe the snippets, some of the quotes, whatever else. And I think that's a very clever thing. So I went back to something we mentioned many years ago, very much like you, slideshare.net. Now, SlideShare used to be owned by LinkedIn many, many moons ago. It's been bought by Script. It took them quite a while to refresh the interface. And I have to say, I was really, very impressed. So it's still free of charge. You will upload PDFs or PowerPoint or Keynote presentation. But what you can do is then copy the embed code as you would a YouTube video and put that at the start of your long form article. And the slideshow could be very graphic, very, very kind of visually stimulating, and just capture the headlines, just capturing the kind of what this article is all about as a teaser. And then people are more likely to then want to read 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 word copy.
Yeah, this is also good. It's quite interesting to watch the evolution of all of these things, whether it's an Osmo Pocket 1, 2, 3, or these versions of these transcription services. They've come along remarkably, haven't they, over the last few years? I mean, I remember within Adobe Premiere Pro, which I mentioned earlier, there is a transcription service to create subtitles for videos. And a couple of years ago, I used to just not use it because it was so buggy and it was so inaccurate and it used to drive me insane. But now it is so remarkably accurate, and as you say, it seems to be okay with my accent. You said that that this one is okay with your accent, so that's really good, isn't it? When it can pick up the nuances. However, they're still not perfect, are they? And
Yes.
what they don't do is well, there's certainly the one in Premiere Pro. It doesn't learn. So, as you know, in my vlogs, referring to the vlogs again, I often refer to Trisha, my wife, as Mrs. E, short for Edwards. But Premiere Pro always turns that into Mrs. Z, as in Z-double-E. And I have to go through and change Mrs. E to Mrs. Z to Mrs. E, and you think, and up until recently, I couldn't do a find and replace. I would literally have to go through and change each one. So these things are phenomenally good, and they're evolving all the time, but they're still not perfect.
I'm looking for, like you, to the true digital assistant where literally you could upload, which is, you can do some cases, you could 4, 5, 6 hours of you talking so that it understands, your sound, your idiosyncrasies, the way on occasion I can speak too fast and so on. And it just gets it because it's learning. And the whole premise of AI is that it's a learning platform. But yeah, what would you say? We are a year, 2 years away from those AI becoming real good assistants?
Probably, yes.
Excellent. Everyone, we have reached the final segment of our show, one of our favorites, film marketing, just after this. Roger Edwards, you chose Paths of Glory, released in 1957. Let's watch a trailer.
Like me to suggest what you can do with that promotion.
Colonel Dax! You will apologize at once or I shall be placed under arrest.
I apologize for not being entirely honest with you. I apologize for not revealing my true feelings. I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
Since the publication of the book 25 years ago, no one dared to make this movie. It was too shocking, too frank.
What sort of casualties do you anticipate, sir?
Say 5% killed by our own barrage. It's a very generous allowance. 10% more in getting through no man's land, and 20% more getting through the wire. That leaves 65%, with the worst part of the job over. Let's say another 25% in actually taking the anthill. We're still left with a force more than adequate to hold it.
General, you're saying that more than half my men will be killed.
Aside from the inescapable fact that a good many of your men never left the trenches, there's the question of the troops' morale. Don't forget that.
The troops' morale, sir?
Certainly. These executions will be a perfect tonic for the entire division. There are few things more fundamentally encouraging and stimulating than seeing someone else die.
Where in heaven's name are they?
On the left.
Where are the rest? 0+1 and they're still in the trenches. They're not advancing. Miserable cowards. They're not advancing. The barrage is getting away from them. They're still in the trenches. Yes. Captain Nichols.
Yes, sir?
Order the 75s to commence firing on our own positions.
Wow, Pascal. Do you know what the first thing that occurred to me when I watched that trailer again? That bit at the beginning where it says the management of this theatre, etc., etc. And it just occurred to me, back in 1957, most people didn't even have a television. So the only way they were going to see a trailer for a film was actually at the cinema whilst watching a different film. And that made me realise this amazing film, and it is probably one of the best war films ever made, is over 60 years old, and it is such an astonishing piece of cinema. But at the time, marketing it would have been very difficult, not only for the fact that it's actually quite a grim film and isn't exactly happy, but secondly, where do you communicate with people other than if they're in the cinema watching trailers for the films?
You're absolutely right, and we'll talk about the marketing, because what were the channels available? You had radio, tricky one, and you do the research. You'll mention about the controversies. Therefore, I'd imagine radio station would have been nervous about being aligned to this movie. TV, but the minority of people didn't have one. Print, maybe, in newspapers and magazines and so on. But I think also for me, 1957, we have to try and remember or research what the world was like. We are 12 years after the end of the Second World War, the world trying to rebuild itself. And as has been documented many a time, it is part of our traits as human beings to want to move on quickly and leave disasters and horrible times behind. And this is a film that literally takes you back straight into the First World War with everything that happened. So it's a tough proposition for the distributors to kind of wrestle with, isn't it?
It is. And if you actually look at the film itself, it stands out for so many different reasons. It was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first films produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick, who went on to make things like Eyes Wide Shut and 2001: A Space Odyssey and many other films, some of which we really need to talk about in this slot on the show in a future episode. And some of the staging and some of the direction and some of the scenes in this film are just utterly remarkable. I mean, there's one particular long tracking shot of a battle where Kirk Douglas, who's the main protagonist in the film, leads a charge across no man's land. And again, when I was rewatching it, I'm thinking, they didn't have computers to set up all these explosions and all these bullets and all of this. There must have been somebody in the background pulling wires or doing something like that, or some quite analog triggers going on. And yet it's absolutely breathtaking in its authenticity. And, again, I think this is 60 odd years ago this film was put together. Obviously, at the time, Kirk Douglas was one of the biggest stars in the entire world. I think it was shortly before Spartacus, which is arguably his biggest role, but he also appeared in another epic around those times called The Vikings alongside Tony Curtis. So he was one of the biggest stars in the world. But the film was filmed in black and white. So there's another challenge for the distributors, because here you've got all these very big, vivid, colourful films going on at the same time. And here's a film filmed in black and white. And it's an entirely male cast, except for the last 5 minutes of the film when a girl comes up in this last scene and sings a song which sort of gives it a slightly more upbeat ending than it might otherwise have had. But apart from that, it's an entirely male cast. So we've got a grim film, incredibly well shot film, and the subject matter we'll come on to in a minute has been quite controversial. So I think they were dedicated to getting this film out there, knowing of all of these hurdles they were putting in their way to make it successful.
I think you're absolutely right. And what was interesting for me is back to the time. So when you put together a marketing campaign, you try not to operate in a bubble. You can do, if you want to go that far, you can do your pestle analysis and go, what's happening out there in the wild world. And I'm going to go back to, so the context is 1957. The space race intensifies between the US and the USSR and more. The world is still reeling from the Suez Canal crisis. But in terms of world of entertainment, you're right, it was colorful. I mean, Elvis was doing what he could on TV to get essentially kicked out of the screen for gyrating far too much. You had modern jazz breaking new boundaries with the likes of Miles Davis. You had obviously what would then, right in the middle of the baby boomer generation, targeted because they had disposable income having recovered from the war. The first advertising was on TV, radio, print, to transform your home with Art Deco furniture, clothes. I mean, many movies portray this 50s and 60s as being elegant. People no longer just wore the kind of workwear, if that makes any sense. The ladies and men were very elegant. You had the first toys for kids. I mean, the first TV adverts were toys, but things like microscopes and more. It was also a time of transformation. You had, 57, the beginning of the end of school segregation. Mm-hmm. And you had the now famous Little Rock Central High School, where 9 black girls went to a school that up to a point were not allowed to go. So it went on. So this was a time where the world was changing and wanted to extract itself from all of that. And this movie throws you back into not only the First World War, but as you're going to mention moments, the crass and callous behavior of those in authority.
Yeah, and I think that is where the controversy came from. But it is a war film, and as I say, you get this incredible battle early on in the film where the French army are going across no man's land trying to take the German position. But then the rest of the film actually takes place, it's almost like a court-martial environment, where the real enemy is the superior officers, the generals and the colonels, and they come across as the ones who have scant regard for the lower ranks. What happens in the film is that the general in charge is so annoyed that they didn't take the German position that he accuses his entire company of cowardice. He wants to execute 100 of them, but he gets talked down to 3. And he just wants to make an example of the lower ranks. And so they choose 3 men who are basically put through a sham court-martial. Kirk Douglas, very, very incredible performance, tries to defend them in this sham court-martial, but it's a sham court-martial, and therefore they are executed. And that whole thing is, who is the real enemy here? You've got that juxtaposition between the lower ranks of the army and these generals, and the film handles it in all the shots in the film of the generals take place in these gigantic French chateaus, and they're very wide shots, Pascal, as you know, so you can see all the opulence, you can see the chandeliers, you can see the sofas, the chaise longues and all of that sort of thing, the luxury that these generals lived under. And then when you go into the trenches, they're all close-ups of these men, and they're all dirty and they're cold, and they're covered in mud and covered in dirt, and that juxtaposition between how the generals lived and how the ranks lived is horrible. But I remember the first time I watched this, I was a lot younger, and I was despondent for these 3 men who were basically picked at random and shot. I think it's so unfair. It's so unfair. And it's actually based on truth. This was actually based upon a book, which was actually based upon a real, it's called the 𝗬𝗵𝗄 affair back in 1915, where 4 French soldiers were indeed executed in similar circumstances. And because of this, in France, this film was banned until 1975. It was not shown in France until 1975, but other countries actually banned it as well in support of France's objection to it. It wasn't shown in Germany for a few years. In Spain, it wasn't shown until 1986. The Swiss government banned it, and it was even banned in the United States in certain military establishments. And yet it was a film that was telling the truth about something that happened. And I just wondered, as a Frenchman and a film fan, what are your views on the subject matter of the film? It really is quite hard-hitting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you think about one of the straplines, the most explosive motion picture in 25 years, and you could take it literally, it's about bombs exploding in no man's land, but actually it's the disruption effect of challenging the status quo. So I first saw Paths of Glory in the school hall. It was like a canteen transformed into, and it was literally back in the good old days of cameras, playing the movie behind you. You can hear the clack, 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 clack of the reels turning, and then the speakers at the front against a wall or a bed sheet. And so you reminded me that this was banned till 75, because I would have seen it late 70s, early 80s when I was still at school. And I think there was just a realization that, truth has to prevail. I think also there was a change of mood with regard to protecting, if you like, the reputation of, those in authority, because by then it had been made very public about the poor behavior of the French army in Algeria, which was 1962. So, the defense were crumbling somewhat. And from that movie on, there's been so many stories I've seen, and you could argue, Blackadder Goes Forth tackles that very issue as well in its own unique way. But I remember one which was I saw much later, therefore I could take on more information about the story of a boy who finds out his dad has been one of the few soldiers taken to become an example. And the whole village turned against him and his mother because the dad is a coward. And what he decides to do, the boy, is to go all the way to the front to find the truth. And he finds a priest who was there before his dad was killed, to tell him that his dad was not a coward, that in fact he'd just been selected. And he discovers others who are still in prison, allegedly because they were deemed to be coward. And so from Paths of Glory, that is revisited over and over again. But you can see how there was such nervousness about, we're trying to rebuild the world here, and this true story could completely undo what we're doing. I mean, I was thinking out loud as well on behalf, for example, of the German distributors. This film was filmed in West Germany, and you kind of think, we could be accused of trying to literally rattle sabers with France all decades later by not only allowing this movie to be made in our country, but also showing it at the Berlin Film Festival. So I have some sympathy for people of the time to go, do you know what, we're going to skip that one because, frankly, we're trying to have as good a relationship as we can with the rest of Europe.
Yeah, and in the trailer, it actually says no one dared to make this movie. It was too shocking. It was too frank, actually referring to the book upon which it was based. So they knew that they were caught in controversy when they made the film. And I do believe that there was pressure from the distributor to actually build in a happier ending, in that maybe Colonel Dax manages to get the three men pardoned, or they don't go to they don't get shot in the execution scene at the end. But apparently Kirk Douglas himself was absolutely adamant, to the point of walking out of the film, saying no, it has to be the bleak, grim ending, because this is an important statement to make. And one of the things that I do find fascinating about this film, Pascal, is, again, perhaps because it's such an old film, but there is an absolute mass of content out there where people are discussing the nuances of these, not only the performances, but the actual messages within the films. And I came across one, and it's just worth reading out a paragraph. This guy does an analysis of why this is an anti-war film. And most anti-war films are really anti-violence films. But what this film does is it doesn't it acknowledges that violence was absolutely part of war. And it says in the end, in this sense, Paths of Glory is successful as an anti-war film precisely because it doesn't try to be anti-violence. It doesn't fall into the trap of trying to depict violence as inhumane whilst also using it to thrill the audience. We get a big glorious battle scene early on, but then that's it. Everything after that is a different kind of violence, the kind made not in battlefields but in meeting rooms. And I think that's incredible. And if you think, you also said there was other films, obviously bigger films released in 1957. The other big war film that came out in 1957 was Bridge on the River Kwai. Now that's probably the much more famous film. It's in colour. But if you think about it, that almost glorified war to a certain extent, didn't it? It was in Technicolor. There was the very catchy 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and the other, but it had a happy ending because they blew the bridge up. Compare that to the black and white film that you have here, Paths of Glory, with its bleak ending. But actually, the message that comes out of Paths of Glory ultimately is so much more important for everybody to see than, for example, Bridge on the River Kwai.
And I would go back to, that statement about the most explosive movie in 25 years. Its legacy, I mean, here we are talking about it, but it's encouraged other storytellers, whether it's theatre, whether it's poetry, whether it's movie, to go back and explore this and explore the theme of those in authority completely, neglecting their role as leaders eventually, for the pursuit of this chimera that is success. So claiming the 100 yards of essentially a muddy field so that they can report back to the authorities, but more importantly, then use the media to say, we are winning the war. Look, we are advancing. So listen. Thank you so much for choosing this film, because it allows to discover it as a business endeavor. Someone had to finance Paths of Glory, and I'm sure they knew that it wouldn't be an easy ride. They were up against fierce competition against color-based movies as well. Because when I was reading some of the articles, the decision by Stanley Kubrick and others was to mimic the newsreels of the time. But we're back to that. Who on earth wants to go back 30, 40 years and watch newsreels at a time where people are trying to buy a brand new car or their first television set? I think there was some very, very brave entrepreneurial decision being made, but because they knew that, all right, the 1957 audience is going to struggle with that, but we're going to absolutely nail it in 10 years later, 20 years later, 60 years later.
Absolutely right. Yeah, no, absolute must watch this. And of course, it's only an hour and a half long as well. So unlike a lot of more modern war films, it's quite a quick watch as well.
Excellent. Everyone, that is the end of episode 108 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Thank you so much, Roger, for being an amazing co-host. Thank you for you, viewers and listeners. Please don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave comment in the usual places. Until the next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards.